I believe that the horrifying deterioration in the ethical conduct of people today stems from the mechanization and the humanization of our lives, a disastrous byproduct of the development of the scientific and technical mentality. We are guilty. Man grows cold faster than the planet he inhabits. Albert Einstein. Dehumanization, the process of depriving a person or group of positive human qualities. Dehumanization is the process, practice, or act of denying full humanity in others, along with the cruelty and suffering that accompanies it. It involves perceiving individuals or groups as lacking essential human qualities, such as secondary emotions and mental capacities, thereby placing them outside the bounds of moral concern. In this definition, any act or thought that regards a person as either other than and less than human constitutes dehumanization. Dehumanization can be overt or subtle and typically manifests in two primary forms: animalistic dehumanization, which denies uniquely human traits like civility, culture, or rationality and likens others to animals, and mechanistic dehumanization, which denies traits of human nature such as warmth, emotion, and individuality, portraying others as objects or machines. What I've just informed you of is sourced from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. It's important that I do clue you in on what dehumanization is beforehand. That way you can tie in what has been sourced to what we'll be delving into during the duration of this video. The dehumanization that is present in Jujutsu Kaisen and Bleach for this video, I will only be covering Itadori Yuji as he is presented in the anime, due to the fact that I'm sure many Jujutsu Kaisen fans are anime only, and as for Bleach, I will not be covering Thousand Year Blood War. I'll only be touching the elements that happen during the series that relate to Ichigo, followed by the events that transpire after Karakura Town. Everything else will be handled in a separate video in the future. To begin with, the main protagonist of Jujutsu Kaisen, Itadori Yuji. In Jujutsu Kaisen, mechanistic dehumanization is foundational to the very premise of Yuji's existence. From the moment he becomes soup in his vessel, Yuji ceases to be treated as an autonomous, moral subject, and instead becomes instrumentalized. He becomes an asset within the Jujutsu power structure. His value is determined not by intrinsic individuality, but by utility and containment. This is a textbook case of mechanistic dehumanization, the denial of individuality in favor of function. Yuji is asked repeatedly and explicitly to accept this framework, in which his death is not only expected, but administratively scheduled. The Jujutsu Society establishment's logic is not only sadistic, but bureaucratic. Dehumanization here does not arise from any personal hatred or subjectiveness. It's from rationalized necessity. This aligns closely with a mirror conception of today's systematic dehumanization, where individuals are reduced to statistics, logistical problems, or expendables. Yet, Yuji's psychological conflict stems from a resistance to this reduction. His defining trait is not physical strength, but an insistence on persevering the moral weight of individual lives. He struggles to reconcile two incompatible realities. To understand the full weight of Yuji's dehumanization, it's necessary to move from abstract framing into the specifics, not just have me yap about the parallels of today's dehumanization and the dehumanization found in Jujutsu Society. Although, that is a good topic to pick for another video. Yuji operates under a clear, almost naive ethical mindset inherited from his grandfather. People deserve a proper death, and this principle anchors his early decisions and allows him to justify becoming Sukuna's vessel. In his mind, he is not becoming a weapon or a tool. He is a protector, ensuring that others do not die alone or meaninglessly. His grandpa's request was save as many people as you can and be surrounded by those who care about you. As mentioned before, the first major conflict occurs with his scheduled execution. The Jujutsu authorities do not debate Yuji's morality, intentions, or integrity. They basically perform risk management or risk assessment. He is categorized as an existential threat whose continued existence is tolerated only because it serves a tactical purpose. The eventual eradication of Sukuna. This moment basically sets in stone the future for Yuji's reality, his world. However, the true overt breaking point emerges during the Shibuya incident, particularly through his encounters with Mahito. Mahito functions as the narrative's most explicit philosophical antagonist to Yuji. Because he embodies a worldview in which human value is entirely illusory, to Mahito, souls are malleable objects, and humans are merely raw material for experimentation with his cursed technique. Where the Jujutsu system reduces Yuji to a tool out of necessity, Mahito reduces humans to objects out of conviction, via cursed soul manipulation. Their conflict is therefore not simply physical in relation to their techniques and what they're capable of, but it's ideological. After Sukuna's massacre in Shibuya, when Yuji regains control and witnesses the devastation, he experiences an acute collapse of moral coherence. His foundational belief that he could save people and give meaning to death is directly contradicted by the reality that his own existence enabled mass slaughter. This moment produces a profound shift in his self-conception, the way in which he views himself in reality. Prior to Shibuya, Yuji saw himself as a moral agent, using his power responsibly. After Shibuya, he begins to see himself as a dangerous mechanism, whose personal feelings are irrelevant. This is crystallized during his final confrontation with Mahito, when Yuji declares that he is merely a cog in the machine. It marks the culmination, the result of his internal dehumanization. More importantly, this statement is not imposed on him by others. This is self-adopted. The grief he felt for Junpei, the guilt for Shibuya's victims, rage towards Mahito, were all expressions of his insistence on human moral meaning. But by accepting the cog narrative, Yuji undergoes a fundamental transformation. He relinquishes the need for personal justification. No longer fighting because he believes he can save everyone, but he fights because he has concluded that his role is structurally necessary, regardless of his feelings. When Yuji says, "I've always wanted to deny you, I didn't want to agree with what you said," he's explicitly acknowledging that Mahito was, in a disturbing sense, correct about one thing, about one claim, that killing in the world ultimately operates beyond moral rationalization. Saving people, honoring last words, ensuring proper deaths, those beliefs allowed Yuji to maintain a stable sense of self and to be morally distinct from Mahito, from the curses he fought, which operated without a basis. But now it's different. I just want to kill you. This alone is not a statement of rage or resentment. It's a declaration that motivation itself has become irrelevant to Yuji. Yuji is no longer framing his actions for justice, revenge, or protection. He is operating into a purely functional mindset. If you are born again, I will kill you, no matter how many times. Here, Yuji adopts that mechanistic perspective. He's no longer thinking in terms of individual battles or even his own limited lifespan, but he's framing himself as a reoccurring process, something more akin to an ongoing system than a person with a beginning and end, which culminates in the most analytical line: there's no need for meaning or reason. Perhaps this act will only become meaningful centuries after I'm dead, which marks the total collapse of Yuji's earlier moral mindset, relinquishing the need for immediate justification and accepts a form of impersonal significance, in which meaning, if it exists at all, is no longer something he can access, belonging to a distant future or the broader system he serves. I guess I must be only a cog of some great thing. At this point, Yuji fully internalizes this role. Earlier in the story, being treated as a tool was something imposed on Yuji by the Jujutsu higher-ups, yet here, he voluntarily adopts this identity, not being presented as something akin to despair, but more as a climax, finality, accepting that this cog role resolves the unbearable tension between his empathy and the reality of unavoidable killing. Yet, the last line prevents complete dehumanization. I will keep killing curses before I rust away. The metaphor of rust is significant. Machines rust, but only things that were once alive can fear becoming obsolete. The phrasing still carries an awareness of mortality and passage of time, which suggests that while Yuji accepts this mechanistic role, he remains conscious of his finite human existence within it. This is why, for the first time, Mahito experiences something he had previously denied, which existed within himself. Fear. Being the fear of humanity. When he attempts to flee, he does so in a state that mirrors the very humans he once treated as expendable, reduced to a desperate survival-driven entity, not even addressing the metaphors of being the bunny, the prey, and Yuji being the wolf pack, the predator. Symbolically, Yuji does break Mahito. He forces Mahito into the exact condition Mahito imposed on others, being stripped of perceived superiority and reduced to a prey state within a larger system. However, the narrative deliberately prevents Yuji from completing this victory. Before Yuji can deliver the final blow, Kenjaku intervenes and absorbs Mahito. Yuji may have overcome Mahito ideologically, but Mahito himself was never the ultimate architect of suffering. He was only another component within a much larger system engineered by Kenjaku. In that sense, Yuji's cog realization is immediately validated. Even his most personal battle is ultimately subsumed into someone else's grand design. Hello everyone, this is Nino from, I believe it's been 2, maybe 1 week since the last recording. The time between the Itadori Yuji section and the now upcoming Ichigo Kurosaki section, in the middle of recording, I and Silver recorded another episode, so if my voice sounds a little bit worn out or maybe not as serious as in the first section, that is why. So from here on out, try to bear with my tone of voice and my overall just vibe. Kurosaki Ichigo, the main protagonist of Bleach, the teenager that inspired millions of anime watchers to scream, Bankai! While extending their imaginative zanpakutos forward. Yuji and Ichigo share a spot for best shonen protagonist for me, not only because of the topic we've been discussing through this entire video, but the way they appeal to me, and probably others. They can be relatable, and Ichigo is the most relatable. He's just a guy who wants to protect others, protect his friends and family. Not to say that Yuji wouldn't either, it's just that Ichigo's goal has been consistent throughout the entire series, only coming into issue with his enemies or his inner demons. Ichigo's dehumanization is deceptive, because we're led to believe it begins very early on. During Kisuke's training to attaining Shikai, Ichigo's soul chain breaks just as he attains enough rats to become a Shinigami, leading to him appearing with a hollow mask. We're first led to believe that that's why the mask manifested, but as the next arc progressed, the Soul Society arc, we'd come to the realization that the mask was here to stay, as we got to see an inverted Ichigo inhabit the same realm as his Zanpakuto spirit, Zangetsu. During the battle with Byakuya, just as Ichigo was about to be sent to meet his mother, White Ichigo intervenes, taking over Ichigo's body with the formation of a hollow mask beginning to generate itself onto his face. Byakuya accurately deducts at first that Ichigo, with his question, that being if Ichigo is a hollow, followed by asking who he even was. White's anonymity continues, stating he has no name and demonstrates the proper use of Tensa Zangetsu, Tensa Zangetsu being Ichigo's Bankai. This theme of White Ichigo attempting to take over Ichigo's body, as well as insistently claiming himself to be Zangetsu, carry on to the following Arrancar arc and into Hueco Mundo. Ichigo manages to take a hold of White Ichigo's power, that being hollowification, via the assistance of Shinji Hirako and the rest of the Vizards. The Vizards being Shinigami, who can use hollowification to use Hollow Reatsu. Things seem to settle down after that, even if we witness Ichigo becoming much more battle-hungry as the arc progresses, or Hime even questioning if she even recognizes Ichigo anymore. This all comes to its climax when Ichigo is utterly dog-walked by Ulquiorra Schiffer, the fourth Espada. Ichigo dies right in front of his friends, Uryu and Orihime witnessing him getting impaled, followed by having his heart ripped out. But as Ichigo listens to Orihime's distant pleas of help, Ichigo rises from the dead, becoming fully hollowified, becoming a Vastolorde, the highest form a hollow can achieve theoretically. After this, Ichigo regains control of himself. He internally suppresses the hollow side of his powers, which leads to his inner world becoming flooded from the whirlwind of emotions he feels after the fight. These feelings are visible by the mask design of Ichigo's hollow mask. It becomes just two vertical lines from here on out, being a clear indication of him rejecting his other half powers. Just a brief comment. I know I'm basically retelling the events that transpire for Ichigo, more so than I did with Yuji. Like I mentioned before, Ichigo's dehumanization is deceptive. As such, I have to build up context like I did with dehumanization, because the real dehumanization doesn't occur until the second encounter with Aizen and beyond. Up until this point, Ichigo's crises were internal, questions of who he might become. Aizen, however, introduces a fundamentally different threat, the possibility that Ichigo, regardless of willpower or identity, may simply just be irrelevant. This is where the deceptive nature of his dehumanization becomes clear. Unlike Yuji, who is explicitly treated as a disposable tool from early on, Ichigo is initially framed as uniquely special, a prodigy, an anomaly, someone who constantly is told he possesses extraordinary potential, learning Bankai in 3 days, ish. But this specialness is precisely what Aizen dismantles. He reframes Ichigo's entire life trajectory as something that unfolded within his own calculations, implying that even Ichigo's growth was never truly autonomous, as everything that Ichigo has done up to now, every battle, was all a part of Aizen's plan. By the time Ichigo prepares for their second confrontation, the framing has already changed. Aizen is no longer positioned simply as a powerful antagonist who has defected from the Soul Society. He explicitly declares himself a being who has surpassed, transcended beyond Shinigami and Hollow. In doing so, he reframes the entire battlefield itself. The struggle is no longer between two individuals, ideologies, or a society, but between fundamentally different ontological states. Ontological being the metaphysics of something coming into being, essentially. So it's not a surprise while Gin fights Ichigo, Aizen dog walks Kisuke, Yoruichi, and even his father, Isshin Kurosaki. However, despite Aizen proving to be what he claims to be, a transcendent being via the Hogyoku, Isshin tells Ichigo about one last countermeasure they could try, and it involves just the two of them. Isshin tells about the final Getsuga Tensho, telling Ichigo that he should consult his Zanpakuto, Zangetsu, in teaching him it, warning Ichigo that it will not be easy, but in order to do that, in the very little time that they have before Aizen returns to the Soul Society to destroy it, they need to access the Dangai, a corridor-like dimension that connects the worlds of Bleach. Ordinarily, using the Dangai is almost impossible for training purposes due to the cleaner existing inside it. However, Aizen has evolved so far that he destroyed the cleaner, thus allowing Ichigo to train within the Dangai. The Dangai has the Sword of Time, so think of it as like a hyperbolic time chamber for Ichigo to achieve the final Getsuga Tensho. To achieve it, Ichigo must abandon the fundamental premise that defines a person within Bleach's metaphysics, the separation between self and ability. He does not merely learn a technique, he becomes Getsuga itself. The act requires dissolving the distinction between subject and weapon, effectively transforming Ichigo from an individual who possesses power into a phenomenon constituted by power. This is why the visual of fused Zangetsu is so thematically important. The merged figure is not presented as a new ally or a reconciled partner, it's represented as a unified ontological state, where Ichigo's humanity, his hollow nature, and his Shinigami essence cease to exist as a distinct category. In analytical terms, this represents a different form of dehumanization than Yuji's mechanistic reduction. Yuji is dehumanized by being reduced into a function within a system, while Ichigo is dehumanized by transcending so far beyond human limits that the category itself can no longer meaningfully apply. This becomes fully apparent in the final confrontation with Sosuke Aizen, after Ichigo leaves the Dangai carrying his unconscious father over his shoulder, the two looking as if they've spent months elsewhere. There's a clear shift in Ichigo altogether. He looks way more stiff, even when just standing still. Not only that, but his Zanpakuto has fused to his body, and he's eerily calm given the fact the 13 court guard are incapacitated and cannot face Aizen, effectively making Ichigo a last line of defense in the story. By this point, Aizen is undergoing rapid evolutionary transformations through the Hogyoku, continually shedding prior limitations in his pursuit of godlike existence. Yet, when Ichigo emerges from the Dangai, the dynamic shifts very dramatically. For the first time, Aizen is no longer the transcendent figure. He cannot sense Ichigo's Reatsu at all. Within Bleach's internal logic, this is not simply a measure of strength, it signifies that Ichigo now exists on a plane beyond Aizen's perceptual framework. The being who once declared himself superior to all Shinigami and Hollows now finds himself unable to even categorize Ichigo's state of existence. At first, he deludes himself into believing that Ichigo traded all his spiritual pressure into physical power, hence why later he could go toe-to-toe with Aizen without even taking a single hit, along with enduring the slices that cut mountains, which we also learned weren't from Aizen, but from Ichigo. The way I describe Ichigo's dehumanization is akin to that of a soldier in the military. In the military, individuals are broken down to be expendable killers, the excuse being that the system requires these soldiers to harden up. The process is often described as grinding recruits down to harden them up. The intense stress is intended to create automatic obedience to superiors and to divorce soldiers from non-violent instincts. Key differences, though, Ichigo shows a lot of humanity even after undergoing Dangai training. His tone comes off as melancholic, unhappy, dejected, and even conclusive, sounding more like a ticking time bomb, especially when he tells Aizen that he doesn't want to fight in Karakura Town. When Aizen rejects this request, Ichigo makes it known that it wasn't a request but a demand, grabbing Aizen and lifting him out of there. To add on further, later in the fight, Ichigo is downright petty, calling back in the Soul Society arc when Aizen caught his Bankai. Ichigo does the same thing with Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu, and even asking the same question that Aizen did originally in fake Karakura Town. What an odd reaction. When I backed away in our last battle, you stopped me and asked why. Now you're doing the exact same thing. So let me ask you the same question, Aizen. Why did you back away just now? Despite Ichigo's pettiness, this exchange never carries Aizen's earlier arrogance. Instead, it retains a subdued, almost sorrowful quality, which reinforces the core distinction between their respective transcendences. Aizen seeks transcendence to affirm his superiority and autonomy. Ichigo accepts transcendence as a necessary condition for protecting everybody, even at the cost of his own powers and himself. This difference is what keeps Ichigo's humanity even when during the moment he appears most removed from it. In fact, one could argue that Dangai Ichigo represents not the loss of humanity, but its paradoxical culmination, a state in which he becomes capable of discarding his own personhood precisely because he still values the lives of others more than his own. But at the same time, there's a glaring issue with that idea. By looking deeper, Isshin described Ichigo's mother as like the sun. She illuminated everything, forgave everything, just like Ichigo, who changes the world as he goes. Byakuya, Grimja, Ulquiorra, as well as the entire Soul Society. Yet, when he faces against Aizen, somebody who has gone too far into their madness, he has to accept the fact that he has to kill Aizen. If he continues to exist, he'll just keep evolving. So, when Ichigo initiates Mugetsu, his hair changing from orange to black can be interpreted as him losing his humanity, as the ultimate act of inhumanity is to take another life. Ichigo stoops to the same level as Aizen, shattering the illusion Aizen lives in. Much like Yuji, his victory is not even completely his, as Aizen, even after taking a direct hit from Mugetsu, is still alive. Despite that, he's weak enough for Kisuke to seal, leading to Aizen having one last outburst before being sealed away. Ichigo comments how Aizen's blade felt lonely. I won't go too deep into Aizen because, due to the fact that he's a character to dissect for another day, and he's very rich in character, but Ichigo concludes that he just wanted an equal, despite his original goal of taking out the Soul King. Aizen sought transcendence to escape loneliness. By rising above others, Ichigo reaches transcendence and responds by trying to understand the loneliness within his enemy. Aizen survives the attack, ultimately being sealed away by Kisuke Urahara, rather than fully being destroyed by Ichigo himself. This narrative choice mirrors the same structural pattern seen in Yuji's arc. The protagonist delivers the decisive ideological defeat, but the final resolution is carried out by a larger system operating beyond them. And by the end, Ichigo becomes just as powerless as Aizen, who's sentenced to 20,000 years in the lowest level of the underground prison of the Soul Society, Muken. Ichigo loses all his powers, being reduced to an ordinary human. And that's where I found the elements of dehumanization in Jujutsu Kaisen and Bleach. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, please leave a like and a comment. Engagement helps to get this video out to other people. Apparently you can hype videos and that's supposed to help, but I'd appreciate it. I digress. Thank you for staying.